IVM.
This is Audio Gyan, and I am your host Kedar Nimkar. Welcome to a deep dive into the minds of luminaries from the Indian creative world. I'm going to start with a slightly filmy dialogue, which is in Nagesh Kuknur's film Teen Diware. During the end, Juhi Chawla tells Nasruddin Shah that Zindagi koi khel nahi, which can be translated as life is not a game. To which he replies, हाँ लेकिन उसको उस नजर से देखोगे तो मजा बड़ा आता है. Which again can be translated as if you look it from that perspective, it's more fun. So yeah, talking about games, today we have Poornima Seetharaman with us on AudioGAN. She's a game designer from Bangalore and first Indian woman to be enlisted in Women in Game Hall of Fame. Currently, she's a director of design at Zynga and ambassador of Women in Games. Poornima is also co-founder of Pinaka Interactive, an independent game design and development studio. Apart from being a visiting faculty at NID in her last 15 years of career, she has worked with like big names and also for big games. So all about that. In fact, she has a very like great work which I'm going to put in the show notes. We'll try and document few nuances of game design and understand a little bit about what happens in the world of gaming. So welcome Poornima to AudioGAN, and it's a real pleasure to have you on the show.
Thanks, Kedar. Glad to be here. Thanks for having me.
Awesome. So yeah, as I said before the recording started, I'm not like a gamer, but I'm very curious to know what happens in the world of gaming. Some technical bits, some market sort of understanding, and more from a designer's angle. So yeah, if we can start off by you giving us like a quick background at how you got into games and also some big names that you have worked in what capacity, how did it unfold? I'm sure like I've heard your other podcast and also the TEDx talk, so I'm going to put that, but if you can just like quickly briefly tell us.
Sure. So it basically, if I have to sum it up, it was purely by chance. Game development, that is, right? So gaming, basically, middle class families, 12th standard, mom and dad had like saved up and brought me a computer so that, I'm going to go into engineering. I need all this prep done. So that's how my introduction to like a home PC happened. And obviously with that, my friend introduced me to games. And that started with like games like Age of Empires 2, Warcraft 3, and of course, Road Rash and Zeus and these kind of games, right? And it was very funny because they taught me how to play Age of Empires. I learned that pretty quick. I really liked it. And then we used to go to a LAN cafe and play it, competing against each other to the point I got really good at it, where they used to find it hard to beat me. So it was a very funny take of how the student becomes the master sort of a thing. And what it also happened is I started designing my own campaigns in both Age of Empires and Warcraft. So they had custom campaign editors, and I used to do that. And I used to send that to some of my friends in college for them who played Age of Empires and Warcraft to see what their feedback was. And, just so that I can improve the campaign, make it more fun, make the story better, make the characters appear better, the civilization and all of that. I didn't quite know it was like a part of game design, like modding a game and all of that. Never knew that, right? Like game development was almost unheard of, like 16, 17 years ago, probably more. And so then what happened is, I started really enjoying making these campaigns, getting these feedback from all these different people. So that was where it was parked. And maybe I didn't really think too much about it and all of that. Finished engineering. I did like a .NET course. And then I somehow landed in a job, which one of my college friends recommended me to this company, which happened to be a game development company. I actually went there as a programmer because after engineering, that's like the most nuanced thing you go into. And there I got the opportunity to kind of delve into game design. They were looking for game designers, and 16, 17 years ago, there are no game designers who exist in India. And my friend then told them, hey, why don't you give her a shot? Because, she used to do all these campaigns back in college. Maybe she would be interested in this and we don't have to necessarily look outside. And that's what they did. They said, you have 1 month, you have all these Dungeons and Dragons manuals. They were making a role playing game, which is similar to this popular game called Neverwinter Nights, but for the mobile platform. So this was a South Korean company, but operating out of Bombay. So yeah, that's pretty much it. I remember opening all these Dungeons and Dragons manuals and just completely like loving it. I was lost in that universe. Like I think whatever I was doing these custom campaigns, this was way more. Like I could create everything from the ground up. Like it almost felt like you can be that god who can create an entire universe, a world. You can weave everything. You can tell how every object there has to operate and react to different responses. And the fact that someone would play this and have a lot of fun, right? So that part really got to me. And I think that's where I started loving game design. Since then, it's been a huge part of my life. Like while I have, I said, different roles, producer, PM, studio head, all of that, but game design is something I can't let go. I just completely fell in love with it.
Okay, nice. So, but being a player and like cut to then transitioning to like designing a game. So, how has your sort of definition of game design even changed over time? Because when you sort of start, you are more into, can I create something? Can I sort of make something work from a technical standpoint also, and from like aesthetics and other, just putting out work, right? So that's where you start, and your definition is more of, can I execute this? And as you grow in your career, as you grow in your sort of the ladder, your definition slightly changes. Sometimes it's about problem solving, sometimes it's about engagement. So any changes that you saw?
Definitely. I think that's part of the growth. But one clear thing is that between a very large difference between a gamer versus a game developer, designer, or any aspect of it, right, is essentially the key difference of saying that, hey, this is something I would like versus someone saying that someone said they like this and we need to make that happen, right? So that's the very different sides of the same coin, I would say. Like one is the consumer who's telling us this is what they want, and the other is the creator who's saying, let's take that feedback and implement it or make something that players like this would want to play, right? Like that itself is a persona difference that a game developer has, which is why we say like a game designer needs to be a gamer, but not all gamers are game designers, right? So
Oh,
there is
interesting.
there is a very different way of thinking that changes when you come into game design. Start thinking about it. And you rightly said, right, when you start off, you are thinking more about, you're super passionate, you're like, I want to make this game, I want to make another GT, I want to make another Warcraft. That's what you are thinking. But as you get into the nitty-gritty details of it, you realize that it's not going to be an easy job. There are so many things to take. The way you build the foundation, the layers that you add to it, what are the other problems. Now when it comes to games like what we make at Zynga, which is live ops, or freemium games, as we say, in there it is like you mentioned, is like, the engagement, it becomes very critical, because it's a living game. Like our franchises have lasted like decades of time. Like it has been that long. So how do you keep players engaged for that long? There needs to be something in the game that we're constantly giving, making it better, continuously also changing and adapting with our target audience who's playing, because they are also growing as the game grows, right? So always tapping into what our players needs is a very critical component, irrespective of the kind of game you make. Even if you're making a AAA title, you need to know your audience. If you're making God of War, you need to know who will consume this. And you cannot always rely on only the God of War fans. You need to try and bring new people also to start playing these games, right? Like that's how you grow as a business. So how do you tap into that market? All of these things start become this problem solving that you talked about. How to get engagement, retention. Then if it is a freemium game, then what is the conversion rate? How do we monetize these players so that our players who are not paying can also consume the content, but we as a business continue to grow? So there's a lot of things in place.
Yeah, I think I should have done like some 5 episodes ka series only. Maybe we'll do it sometime. It's so fascinating. Yeah, so we'll get into like very nuances of like few things because it's very vast. And I wanted to just start off by like, if you can set the landscape, right? Any broad numbers of how grown or how mature is the gaming world ecosystem in India, right? Full-time gamers kitne hain, yeah, like how big is the market, or are like what are different types of gamers also? Because for me, like playing Ludo is also gaming, right? Yeah, you have any numbers or any broad sort of picture which you can paint for us?
So, not particularly on full time or professional gamers, but overall gamers as a statistics, I think it's anywhere between 400 to 500 million casual gamers that we have in India.
Oh,
Right?
okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
that's huge because we also have like a great mobile penetration compared to other countries. So mobile games are like a huge thing, especially in India. And yes, why is Ludo not considered to be a gamer? Right? Like if you have heard my talk, you would know I talk about this broad-minded spectrum where I think people are placed depending on the game, their mood, their persona, their age, everything on anywhere in that spectrum. And that spectrum can range from like, casual to hardcore. And when I say it is not about the player, it's more about the player equation with the game. Like I can take something like a Dota, which is considered to be a more on the hardcore side of things. I can actually choose to play it very casually. Who's stopping me? Right? I can take a Skyrim or a God of War and just navigate through the game and do nothing, not really care about achievements or beating something. I just want to enjoy the game, right? So that's me taking a AAA considered hardcore title. While of course skill gaps are there, that is one thing that comes part of the game itself. But if I pick that, I as a player can continue to play it casually, and I can take a game like a Candy Crush, right, or a Farmville, and I can play it at a hardcore level. Like I can be crazy about it. Right? Tetris, which is one of the easiest arcade game, which is considered to be the super casual, simple game that existed and has stood the test of times. Today there are world championships happening for Tetris, right? Like the hardcore competitions about who solves it faster. So how is it that something as casual or arcadey as a Tetris can be played at a hardcore level, right? So I feel like you can pick up a Ludo, you can be a hardcore player of Ludo, right? You can pick up a Rummy and do that. You can pick up a cricket and do that. And I can pick any of these games and play it at a casual level. So it doesn't matter. We are both consumers of that game. And hence we can call ourselves gamers or even players, which is a more generic terminology where, these elitism of gamers doesn't exist. We are consumers, so we are players. We play a game, we are players.
Got it. Got it. So when you said 300 to 400 million, it's almost as deep as WhatsApp has penetrated. So we can safely say sort of whoever has WhatsApp must have. And this is like, is there like, this is for like last 5 years or like a generic trend since the mobile penetration has happened?
It's a trend. I think last year it might have been closer to the 300 to 400 range, and expected for 2022 will be hopefully tipping over close to 500 probably.
And this is for mobile, you said?
This is casual players.
Casual, okay,
So
across.
it can technically include across the board. But largely, since we are looking at India, the primary consumers will be mobile.
Got it. Got it. Yeah. So any guesses? Like, is there any report or anything which is being published to know that these are the statistics and like number of? I mean, we need not like cover this today, but is there any something like that?
There should be. I think Google conducts some reviews like that on mobile players. Unity does that. Statista will definitely have some statistics on it as well. So there'll be bits and parts of these reports. Some could be paid, but generally these reports should be available.
Yeah, yeah. No, I'm interested because even Netflix has launched games, and what I heard was that they have like the gaming industry has generally sort of surpassed the Hollywood this thing also. So yeah. Anyway, we'll come to that later. So so getting much more deeper, can you share what are the different categories of games for a layman, and obviously in the digital world? So this is mainly referring to your TEDx talk. Like, do games always have to be sort of a particular type, or what are the different types of games? Yeah.
So there are too many actually. Like right now, the types are becoming more and more as we speak because people are coming up with different things. So one is the type of game, then there is the genre of game. There are different things to tackle here. But to give like a very easy summary of it, there's something called hyper casual, which is like if you can think of the most casual level. Like you can pick up and play. There's barely any learning curve. You can just immediately play, and it is a very mundane kind of activity that you have to keep doing.
It's like Candy Crush.
Candy Crush will come casual. This is even bare bones to it.
Okay.
So we have Rolik, which has like High Heels, which is a Zynga company. So High Heels is basically like, you just have to simply swipe and collect different heels, and then you pass, and there's a minimal obstacles in the way. So it's a very simple game. But it's like, you if you think of it from a perspective, like you're so tired after work, you don't want to like consume something that's gonna take a lot of thinking and navigating or skill input or hand-eye coordination. You don't want to do that. You want to just pay something that gives you some sort of a dopamine rush kind of a thing. So that's where hyper casuals come in. Like very simplistic, very simple art, nothing exceptional, but great gameplay, fun gameplay. So that comes as your hyper casual. Then there is your casual layer, which is where your Candy Crush and all come. Even Farmville can be considered a social casual layer. So like you can see there are spectrums of it, right? Like casual itself will have a spectrum of what is minimal and what is max, right? Then you have something called the mid-core, which is like your Clash of Clans and Clash Royale and all of that. Then comes your hardcore, which is like your God of War or your Counter Strike, and all of that can come in the hardcore category. Now, again, more or less, many of them have these intersections. So not everyone agrees one thing fits in one place and the other thing fits in another. Like that's a argument that no one wants to get into because everyone has their own way of doing it. But this is an easy way to understand maybe like a difficulty chart of games. So you start here, and then if you like it, you can constantly play, level up, and get there. Much like game progression in any games. This is kind of the progression that you would see. And now we have things like hybrid casual, which is in between the hyper casual and the casual margin, right? So we have like some things that is not as engaged as a casual, but not as disengaged as a hyper casual. So they're calling it a hybrid casual game. So these mid things keep coming in, and which is why it's better to think of everything as a range. Like there's an entry range and there's an exit range, and then every category has those, and you can have games across the spectrum. And then, of course, there's the genre, and genres are crazy. You can have any number of genres, like your puzzle game genre, your tycoon genre, your cooking game is a genre, card games are a genre, then sports, shooting, narrative, RPGs, RTS, so many to name there, right? Like, so all of these are like subcategories. Like you can have a hyper casual, which is like a puzzle game, right? You can have a casual game that can be like a shooting game. So all of that is possible depending on how you marry the genre and the type.
So yeah, I mean, it can be easily sort of plotted on a 2x2 sort of Excel, whatever. Like yeah, and then different games will fall in different buckets as on the spectrum scale also, and also on the genre.
Except no one's going to agree on one Excel sheet.
Yeah. I think it becomes very personal, and if they are into deeper stages, then it's also challenging, and yeah, it would be interesting. Cool. Let's take a short break here. We'll be right back. Okay, welcome back to the show. Since you mentioned also about they are constantly evolving and changing, but is there a pattern? Because again, I did one interview long time back with Siddharth Rao, who's a founder of Web Chutney, the advertising agency. He mentioned that typically ideas are analog. You have something which you have seen and then it translates. Obviously, with digital becoming so integral part of our life that sometimes the ideas are also digital. But is there any pattern that people used to play something and now they have just brought it online and added more imagination to it? Is there a pattern, or it can be purely just self-thought in the digital world itself?
It can be both, actually. See, I would like to believe that anything that we do, an inspiration, whether it is conscious or subconscious or unconscious level, it comes from your life experiences. And those life experiences in today's world is largely digital. Back in our days, it was more analog, right? And then we moved into the digital era, right? But today, people consume their experiences through a digital medium. So, they're for them, that is like the new analog, I would say, right? Like their consumption of experiences coming through that, right? Like I remember growing up, we didn't have a TV. Like when TV was a new thing, like black and white and then color, things like that. And today, when you talk about it, they can't even correlate it, right? Today, most of the kids are consuming content either through phone or like their laptops or tablets. Even though a TV exists, it's nothing like for us. It was a magical thing when it came out, but for them it's nothing. It's part of their life, right? So things have changed in those, so they are consuming experiences through all these mediums, and that's what makes it an experience that you consume, and then you try to recreate it in your own fashion. And whether that is driven by something of your past, present, or what you've heard, anything, at the end I feel everything is like storytelling. Whether it was your grandma telling you the story or you read a story, it doesn't matter. But as humans, we love this, right? Like we love that imagination of stories, of that fantasy. And especially with a medium like games, where it is so prominent. And when I say that, I don't necessarily mean that you only have to create story content, right? Like even a match 3 game like a Candy Crush can have a nice storyline to it. Something that inspired you. Like maybe Candy was something you were obsessed with as a kid, and that could have given rise to Candy Crush or something like that. I mean, that's not the story, but it's very likely, right? Like it could happen for sure. So yeah, I think it's about experiences that you take these inspirations from and translate that into what you like. And there could be bias. There could be this unconscious bias that we have, that what we have consumed, we are trying to emulate that. And sometimes it's just deep creativity. Then again, who are we to tell that the creativity is not an unconscious bias?
Very fascinating. In fact, it's giving me like actually some kick right now to open a game and start playing.
Nice. You should.
Yeah. So speaking about this, like the you also spoke about the dopamine rush, right? Can you elaborate a bit more about are there different types of frameworks while making games? And especially I got to know the MDA framework. So if you can elaborate on that and any other sort of framework that typically gaming companies or Zynga uses to design and develop games.
Sure. So largely these frameworks are like more, I would say, theory. And it is great when you're learning game design, like in a college atmosphere and all, right? I had not learned any of these frameworks when I had started game design, right? It was pretty much try it out and figure it out. If it works, it works. And this going with gut and experience of what you've played as a gamer, and then, something that you worked on and like what others are feeling. So it's a lot of qualitative feedback that we take, right? But where these frameworks usually help is today to understand what you have done. Like my personal opinion of everything is that, anything that is defined is usually coming from experience. It's not like the definition happened first and then you made it work. It's always the other way around, right?
Correct.
Like something happened, people were working on it, someone observed it and said, hey, we can actually categorize this into a framework that's easier to understand and make it happen, right? But technically, this was in existence. Same with studies, right? Like whatever we are learning, it's not like for us, when we are learning it, we think we are consuming it and getting to learn it and use it. But the chapters were originally created because someone made it happen. And from there, we created those chapters, right? Like it's actually a very nice loop if you think about it, right? Like someone makes it happen, you put it in theory. And because you learned the theory, now you can get better at it. Then you contribute and add a layer to it. And then that goes back to the chapters. It's a beautiful feedback loop, much like games.
Yeah. It's just a slightly better articulation every time. Yeah.
So MDA is one of the most famous framework that people use. Other frameworks are more, I would say, not as global, but it could be at like a very regional or team level of consumption of certain mental models, behavioral models. and all of that, because games are also a lot about psychology. There will be certain human behavioral models that the UX team will bring in, and we can assess that, find out what kind of player types we have in the game, what kind of personas they are, what do they consume, what can we do more in the game to make it better for them, make it more fun for them. So just going back to MBA, it basically is mechanics, dynamics, and aesthetics. And by that, what they want to try and say, it's rules, systems, and fun. Mechanics is your rules. Dynamics is your systems, which is basically the bridge between the fun and the rules. How the thing responds to everything. So that's basically the rule set. The fun element, that is the output of why people consume, and the system layer is basically that is a bridge between them. What I like about MBA is it's interestingly something that most of us designers who never even knew about the framework used to talk about. Like, why do people play games? The most basic question. Like, why do you play? Right? And the fun thing is, it's not one answer. We all have different answers. And that answer can again change on how your day has been. If you had like a very fun day, or not too much work or anything, why you want to play a game changes. To when something, it's like really hard day and you really want to, like, shoot someone in the game, that's a very different perspective to play the game, right? So what the MDA framework's aesthetics, which is the fun element that talks about why people play game, they broke it down to like 8 categories, and which is like they talk about sensation, which is your game as a sense pleasure, affects any of your senses. And now with VR, touch is also a sensor, right? So then it is fantasy, which is game as a make believe. So you can actually be a werewolf, you can be a mafia lord, you can be an animal, you can be a king. Anything is possible in that world. So fantasy, game as a make believe. Then game as a drama, which as humans we love storytelling and all of that, to consume, like, oh my god, what happens next? Like, oh my this action actually changed the course of this story and all of that. So that also is very exciting. Then challenge, which is game as an obstacle course, which is like your Super Mario and all of that, which is pure challenge obstacle course. Is like you're having a lot of fun. And of course, Fall Guys, which is the more famous recent one, which is a complete obstacle course anyway. Then fellowship, which is game as a social framework. So that can be competitive, cooperative, philanthropic, any of it. So replicating whatever we do in a social network in real life, how do we emulate that in games? And also to find like-minded people, right? Like most of us, we have these friends who are game friends because we have similar interests in terms of how we consume and we are passionate about that particular game. So that ecosystem also starts forming and really helping. Then of course your game as a discovery or uncharted territory, like you're trying to explore something, finding something new, learning something new. So that also happens. So this is personally also, I got into Greek mythology because I played a game called Zeus. And I learned more about Greek mythology through that game than I would ever read and consume. Right. So for me, that was great. Like, it's a new thing to learn. And I played the game and I was discovering all of this. It was a very fun exploration for me. Right. Then is game as an expression, which is personalization, customization. How do I represent myself in the game? And how do others see me in that game? Right. Like that is also a very personal aspect for people. And it has really helped a lot of introverts. Most gamers are introverts. Nowadays, it's getting better with streamers and all coming in, which are on the other side. But game developers, gamers are like a good portion of them are introverts. And games actually help them, right? Like most people undermine the importance of it. But it has helped me. It has helped people like me and even more introverts than me to enable to come out and express themselves in that game ecosystem, in that language. Right. And then the last is game as submission, as a pastime. This is the most simplest of things. Like, what do you? I'm bored. I'll just play something. Right. Like it's as simple as that. And it can be more. This is just 8 that they have marked. And it can be a mix of any of that. It can be something derivative out of it. Or you can find a 9th one that is not listed. And it's possible. The framework itself says that. Because fun is so subjective. The definition of fun itself is like that. Right? Like if someone says, we need to make a game fun, it is like, what is fun? Fun can never be defined. It's different for everyone. Someone likes going out is fun. Someone loves to stay in is fun. So how do we cater to both that parties? So which is where the user personas can come in and all of that can factor. But generally, this is what the framework talks about and focuses on why people play, because everything else we can derive from there.
Very interesting. And is this like sort of, yeah, as you said, it's a theory, but is this like a standard framework followed across? I mean, in interviews we have this star framework, right? Situation and sort of. So it's practiced mostly by every company. Where say like this MDA framework is practiced in majority of the companies, or there are like other evolutions and nuances which are there?
Internal ones. So this is actually still a very generic framework.
Okay.
When it comes to like you're focusing more on a particular game's challenge and what it is, then you usually have a more internalized thing. So one of my directors of design, Vimal, and I had done this talk called D7 via 7 designs, which is getting players to retain for 7 days using 7 design principles, right? So certain things, so everyone has their own model of working. So while this is like a theory from where everyone derives out of, there is also Bartle's player types, which is another like talking about different player types that exist in your game. And from there, people derive and make their own version of it, which are usually subject and kept within companies of what mental model they use. There you can actually, explore and figure out and change. But like I said, every company, depending on the game type, the game genre, this varies. So it's all separate. There might be companies who use this exactly. There might be companies which are like doing a mashup of it and personalized to their game experience.
Got it. This 7 number seems to be interesting because I think Facebook also started with this 7 model, right? Make 7 friends in like first day, and you have that sort of flywheel happening. Cool. Yeah, coming to like a bit more psychological aspect of it, from your experience, at least in the world which we are in, the digital world, there are certain metrics and success criteria that everyone works towards, and especially again, it could be a layman understanding, but for game designers, I'm assuming like it would be sort of engagement, it would be sort of time spent, I don't know, hourly active users versus weekly active users. So those sort of metrics that you guys will be working towards. Now, how do you balance? Maybe you can give like couple of metrics that you generally sort of follow, and then how do you balance with this sort of narrative key games are addictive? So how do you balance it out?
Yeah, so I'll get to both these parts separately. Okay, like the metrics that we look at, especially in free to play games, it's usually your daily active users, weekly active users, and monthly active users, right? So that defines like how many users you're getting, how many of them are coming back, and all of that. What it also gives us is retention. Retention is the most core important thing that as designers we look at. So anywhere from like D1 retention to D180 retention. So anyone who installed the game today, are they coming back the next day, or have they come back in say 7 days, right? So we are just seeing that if they're going to come back to the game, right? It's okay if they don't come constantly. That's not the intention. That's why these things are measured in ranges. So I'm not going to check like D1, D2, D3, D4, like are you continuously coming back? No, seeing D1, D7, D15, D30, D60, like that, right? So we're checking it in intervals. And that's because we know there is no way people can keep coming back. But what we want to see is that, can you keep coming back to the game occasionally and continue to play? Like these are games that you can play for long time. There is no pressure to finish everything today, except there are some events and all that might be time boxed. But other than that, you can pace it at your own level, right? Like whatever is your interest. And then, of course, we have our, like, which is a more business driven thing, is your monetization numbers. Like, what's the money we made out of this, right? Like, and that can be your ad monetization, in-app purchases, all of that possible. So these are your high level metrics where, as a designer, the engagement metrics, which is your retention, becomes a very core, important thing of validation of whether they understood your mechanics. Do they like the kind of meta that you have given or the story that you have given? Where are they dropping off? What they like, what they don't like, and then getting into those kind of details of the player journey to see where they dropped off, what they liked, did they come back, and all of that. So that's the interesting component that we keep track of in terms of metrics. Because there's like way more details on the metrics side of thing, but this is the high level aspect of it. On the addiction component, now that's a interesting one, right? So, in fact, just today we were discussing something along that lines where Riot had put out this player dynamics model, which is basically about creating this very sustainable, diverse, ethical game development or games in practice to make sure that so no game designer's intent is to create this kind of crazy addiction. See, addiction is good. Everything in its own quantity or range consumed is good.
Moderation.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think that moderation is needed, right? So if anything goes beyond that threshold, that's bad. And that's true of anything, right? Same. So alcohol exists, we drink, but if you drink more than the necessary threshold, that's addiction, right? So it's the same thing as games. So there's nothing new. Like games are usually centered because it's more interactive. And also it's much easier to blame games when you don't know anything about it, right? So they'll be like, oh, what about game addiction? So my question usually to them is, yes, the extremes are bad and that needs to be taken care of. And that could stem from a lot of different reasons. There was there has been cases of violence, which is usually associated with games. And then I read one story, I don't know when, but someone I think killed or wounded a particular waiter because this tissue that was served in the hotel was dirty, right? So he snapped and he hurt the waiter or murdered. I'm not sure. So I'm like, so where like games did not play any role there, right? So violence exists here. Sometimes it happens to be a gamer who's using that violence for some other reason. It's a psychological issue than a game issue.
Yeah, it's correlation and not causation. It's yeah.
Correct, right? But I'm not averse to saying that games are not addictive. Games definitely are because it is giving you this constant, the adrenaline and the dopamine rush is constantly happening, right? So you are pumped up and then you do something, that activity gives you a dopamine rush, you feel happy and you're excited to do that activity again, right? So it's the same as people getting hooked to gymming, as they call it, right? Like, so how is it any different? It's another medium where something that you like has happened and because of it you keep going back to it. And largely the addiction when it comes to say kids or teens and all of them, which is where this concern comes through, right? With adults, they're like, you earn your money, you do whatever, it's fine. But with kids and teens is where the concern comes. So here what happens is general notion that parents also bring is that it's not good for you, I will not let you play, right? And psychology of kids is that the more you tell them don't do something, they want to do it, right? And the other aspect is, and from the MDA framework, I mentioned about fellowship, which is about finding like-minded people, right? And for kids, this becomes very critical. They actually find like-minded people, or it is something that makes them fit in, is through these games. And we are not able to see that or understand that. And we think you're always wasting time, right? There was a time when playing outside was considered waste of time. Today we have cricket academies and football academies and badminton academies, and it's going to be a matter of time. It's already started. It's just going to be maybe another decade when you will have game training academies which still exist today, and people will be putting people there, and then games will not be talked about as addiction anymore. Right? It's just a matter of us learning and unlearning certain things. But as kids, putting that time. So I do this with my sister. So my nephew loves gaming. My sister doesn't understand anything about games. So we have a deal. My thing is that I am okay putting a time box. He loves to play games. You tell him that he has to finish all his homework, everything, whatever is needed for the school and academia. But you're going to assign some time for him to play whatever he wants to play that is age appropriate, right? And let him play, let him enjoy, and sometimes even participate in what he's playing and understand why he plays it. Like, and he plays some of these games really well. Like, he loves to voice over and say what he's doing and all. I said, why don't you just consume what he's trying to do? He's trying to speak in his own language with everyone else. You just don't know the language. That's the problem. So try learning that language. It's okay if you don't participate, but at least try to understand, right? So if you build that reputation, if you build that rapport with your kids, you can easily tell them when it is getting too harmful, right? Like this intervention we do as adults when someone goes into the extreme of an addiction can be done with kids, but you need to be their friend. You cannot
Yeah.
be their mother or father who's like telling aggressively, like you're doing wrong constantly. Because the more you say that, the more they're going to want to do it. So if you think about it, it is all about just psychology and much less about gaming.
Correct, correct. Yeah. And but when you said that you have to really find a balance, and when we have seen Instagram and TikTok and other apps, sort of, yeah, you spend almost 4 hours also sometimes, right? In fact, mobile itself, I think I was reading somewhere like average US citizen opens like a phone 800 times a day. So, like, as these defending these decisions and practicing certain ethical stuff, is it like a core responsibility of a designer, or it's a obviously company as a large they can, but the dynamics, right? There is monetization, there are numbers that are sort of promised to the investors. So where do you sort of like designers, do they put their foot down, or how does it happen?
It does, right? Like, so designers do put their foot down and saying that when it is going overboard, like everything, like I said, has a threshold. Like, if you think about most free to play games, what we also try today is like, say, your crop will only harvest in, say, 4 hours, right? The only way you can eliminate that 4 hours is by paying for it. Like, that's how monetization lever works, right? But
Hmm.
technically, 4 hours is the wait time. What we are saying is, don't come back to the game for 4 hours, come back after 4 hours, right? Or do something meanwhile and then come back, visit us after 4 hours when your crops are ready to harvest, right? Now, you may want to pay for an immediate need, but how much would you pay? It's not like you can keep paying forever, right? So, this monetization that people kind of hate, like, oh, they keep asking for money everywhere. If you think about it, these are actually very ethically placed game design constraints because we know you don't have like an endless bag of money where you can keep paying for it, right? So, we are putting it strategically saying that, oh, this is going to cost you so much to actually, if you want to purchase this right now and harvest the crops right now. And that's why we don't have too many people who will continue to pay,
Hmm.
right? And that is a balance. What is frowned upon is actually in place to make sure we are doing ethical game design.
Wow. Hmm. Yeah, it makes sense. It makes sense. Cool. I can keep going on and on. I'm very sort of curious, but in the interest of time, I think we'll rush through like last four. And yeah, definitely would like to have you again to go deeper into certain aspects. I have last four questions, which is any pattern sort of you have seen that these sort of games work better. Yeah, actually, this can be skipped because you said there is so many spectrums that for a casual gamer, like a lightweight game might just click on the charts, and for certain geographies, yeah, yeah. So maybe, yeah, I got the answer. Maybe we can skip it. Cool. So I've also seen a lot of companies these days are using gamification for referrals and other sort of activation techniques. And in my opinion, I think there's a huge difference between game and gamification. Like, can you shed some light on it? Like, are there games that you designed who have sort of enabled certain discovery or activation of certain products, but not really sort of game type?
Yeah, there is actually. So the key depend change would, I would say, like, in fact, we can think about three things. One is games. Then is we can talk about branded games, right? Like which games are made to promote a particular brand or raise awareness of a particular brand. Then the third one is your gamification, which is what you spoke about. It can be implemented across any kind of category, real estate, your company, any of that, right?
Bank.
So yeah, exactly. They do that, right?
Yeah.
So now the main difference here is, so in games, that is just one component. Like we are saying, hey, if you do this activity and you reach this particular progress, we give you a reward, right? Gamification has taken only that component of it and translated here, right?
Hmm.
The interactivity part of a game where you are doing something in gamification that is associated with your real world activity, right? You're saying, if I have 5 tasks today, and I've completed all these 5 tasks, I'm going to get something. And that's what games do too. But in games, it's actually interactivity that you're doing with a digital medium. Here, these 5 tasks are part of your work or something else, right? Like I am doing, okay, I need 5 documents to be done today. I've done that. My points increase and I'm better on the leaderboard, right? So they are using your real life as the replacement of that interactivity that you have with the digital medium, and using that same reward mechanism, which is a great driver to again give that kind of dopamine rush, that competitive edge, all that thing that clicks for games. They've taken that component and used it in gamification. Now, in case of a branded game, which is where clearly it is motivated to raise awareness or get people to visit a brand or buy something and all, those are custom made games. And there the interactions can be as deep as the entire game or it can be as minimal. We have done, like, I think Farmville once had an association with McDonald's. And, like we had that, like Farmville 1 times. And that kind of like, you can get something special if you, and you can have both relations, right? Like you play the game and you get some vouchers of McDonald's, or you go there and then you may get something about Farmville. So it can be like both ways, driving engagement for both parties kind of thing. So that again, we do that in many games. We actually end up doing it. So that also continues to happen.
Okay, got it. Cool. I think I'm going to come to the second last question, which I think a lot of people might be like looking forward to, because it's a more practical sort of a question, which is in again UI UX where I work. It's mainly that happens is that I design something in Figma or some, say, Photoshop or somewhere in Sketch, and typically it's coded by front-end engineers, right? How does it happen? You have a game design and a development studio. So how can one become a game designer? It's tough for me to understand that what sort of tools are there, or like how do you create, like what do you do in that, like Photoshop as an IDE, similarly, is there something like that? And then you also spoke about there's so many fields which open up, which is like your render, your light effects, and then your sound design. So if you can give like a very broad landscape, and then how does design and development go hand in hand?
Sure. So gaming, I think, is this one of these brilliant industries where if you think of a particular role, it exists. Right? It may not exist in each game development company, but in the industry, you will have that, right? You have actors, you have voiceover artists, you have marketing, community, customer support, user acquisition, then like, your admin, HR, IT, all of that anyway comes in. And then comes the core game development, right? Like, so, but there are so many adjacent things. And if you look at a larger studio, they'll have so much bifurcations of it, like breakdown of each and everything specialist. There is like a hair texture specialist. They just do that. They just do hair specialization. And then there's like a fabric specialist who will do only fabric in the game. It's exists. It may not exist for one company, but if you look at the industry, that is a niche set of things that is required for certain kind of games, right? So it's I always say, like, gaming industry is like, you think of any role, it exists. What you need to know, game design is the most tricky thing. See, most others you can say, oh, if you're doing 2D art, 3D art, animation, there's very clear definition of what you need to learn and all of that. Game design is tricky because there is no IDE. Unlike, like, you can't say, oh, you practice Unity or Unreal and all. No, it doesn't exist. Game design is usually done in a Word document or a PPT.
Oh,
right?
wow.
Yeah, it's basically that. However, you need to know a lot of things. You need to know how to do like a flow diagram. You can use anything, right? A lot of my designers actually use Figma and talk about how the user will go from here to there. You need to know math because there's be a lot of game balancing, tuning for damage equations. You need to know how AIs will respond. There is so many of it. All this will go into a document, but you need to know the entire framework, the entire algorithm. Basically, you're going to define the entire skeletal system of what that game is going to be, right from every small step. And then you're going to build it from the skeleton to the entire body, right? And each of those layers is where you're getting the other discipline in to put that in for you. But you need to know how those layers work. and where they are going to merge, because otherwise it is not going to be executed properly. So while most people think game design is easy, and we do get a lot of opinions, because game design is basically people attribute it to idea. You're the idea guy, you're the idea person, whatever. But that's not it. Game design is about taking an idea and making it into a game. And that part only few people can do. Right? Ideas are dime a dozen. Everyone can give ideas. We have taken ideas from others that we may not have got, but not everyone has the capability of taking it and making it. Right? You need to break it down to the nitty gritty details. Like game design is about saying that if I press this arrow button, how many units should this character move? And what should be like the animation look and feel of how it should actually move? Right? And when I press that arrow button, what is the speed? What kind of physics should act on it? All of this has to be defined. While the animation is done by art, the physics is done by the developer. You are telling them, you're guiding them, saying, this is the experience overall that I want and I'm expecting from this character. And that's just for character moving in one direction. So when you're making that entire game, you can imagine what all goes into it. So you need to know your physics, you need to know your math, you need to be good at communication, you're going to interact with a lot of people, you need to have a good visual understanding, you need to have a good UX experience understanding, you need to have a good knack for knowing that this kind of sound would work here, that kind of sound would work here. You basically will be like managing the whole thing, like that's your baby and you're creating it, but you need all of these disciplines to align with you to actually create it.
You are into classical music as well, right?
Yeah, I mean, I've not learned it, but I am.
Yeah, I think it seems to be simpler right now.
It's very similar, actually. I did an entire talk on how classical music and games can correlate.
Yeah. Wow. I'm amazed. So, yeah. Plus QAs, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
They have the hardest job. Like, they think like, outside of it, they'll be like, oh, wow, your job is all about playing games every day. My goodness, they have the hardest job. Like they have to find everything again and again, like keep playing it again and again. So you're not playing it for the fun of it anymore. You're trying to break it. You're trying to find every possible scenario so that the players will not have to face that, so that you can resolve it before it goes to them.
Yeah. To conclude, like any top 5 games that you love and any tips and tricks, because I have a nephew who wanted, he was in 9th and he used to play continuously, and at the same time I had happened to visit Hyderabad where there was like some big gaming setup happening, and I came back and I said, what do you want to do after 10th? And he said, I think commerce. And I said, why? You love, like, I see you just playing, why don't you try that? And he said, because there was no ecosystem, and obviously family, sort of, the social circle that you live in were not exposed, so he couldn't fathom that. But maybe if you listeners can gather some inspiration. So would love to know your 5 favorite games and any tips for listeners to get deep into this rather than just pure entertainment.
Yeah,
I mean, that's also fine, but still.
Absolutely. So I'll talk about my all-time favorite is Age of Empires 2. Like, I think I attribute everything to that game, my interest to my career. So that and Warcraft 3. However, both of these games are old, but you can play like more World of Warcraft, which is a more recent version of it, and also the Age of Empires. The HD version has come out. That's also something. But on more somewhat recent, I would say, play Gris, which is a lovely game. It actually takes you through the 5 stages of grief. It's brilliant. It's great mechanic. It's aesthetically brilliant, and so I would definitely recommend that. Then there's another game called Journey, which again is all about experience. And my most of my suggestions are going to come this way, because I am now at an age where I love this kind of experiential games. So that's really fun. And along with that, I would also recommend this game called Florence, which is on mobile, which is a very simple game and it's purely narrative, I would say. But what I love about it is its simplicity. There's no very exceptional mechanics, no skill level challenges. It's about consuming a story with minimal interactivity and you still feel very engaged with it, right? And I feel these are like very easy places for people to start if you are not really into games, but you want to experience games for the experience it offers, right? Rather than necessarily the skill set. And of course, our game, which is Farmville, definitely do check it out.
Yes, yes. I'll plug in here. My favorite game was SimCity. Yeah, and then Angry Birds. Directly, I came to Angry Birds, and
Yeah.
yeah, I've bought it also many times. Cool. Yeah, and any sort of concluding words of wisdom or any inspiration sort of for people to get into game design?
Yeah, I would say, see, don't worry about academics in the sense you don't need to learn a game design course to be a game designer. Half the time, we don't even look at what your education was. I mean, we expect you to be a graduate and finish with your studies because that shows some level of commitment, except if you're like extraordinarily great. We don't mind that also, right? What we look at is the passion. And when I say passion, it is a lot of people misinterpret it as like, I play a lot of games, I want to get into gaming, right? Like I want to get into the gaming industry. But you need to understand, can you break it down? Like what aspect of gaming do you want to get into? Like I usually get a lot of these questions like, oh, you want to get into gaming, I've been playing games are my life. I'm like, yeah, great, but you need to understand, especially today, like if this was the same impression 20 years ago, understandable, because you had no idea what to do. But today there's a lot of information out there where they're talking about different disciplines. So first you need to understand what each of these disciplines do and where your talent lies and where you want to build, what are the gaps you want to fix, how you can get better at it. And the easiest way to do that is participate in a game jam. There are so many free game jams that are out there. You don't need to pay any money, you can do it online, participate with people, understand what it is to be like making a game. The best way of becoming a game designer or a game developer, or the only way, is to make a game. Make a game on your own with your own team, on your own, however you want to do it, but make a game. Doesn't matter if it is bad, that's totally fine, but you need to understand what it takes to make a game. Because as much as fun it is from the outside, it is a lot of sweat and blood that we go through, right? And you need to sign up for it, you need to know what it is in it, and then you love it, and then you will stay forever, right? If you are just looking at it from the outside of it because it looks very nice, we want to get in there, it's everyone is talking about it, then it's probably not. You will not last long. You will not work out here. And that's for your own good. We are not trying to push you away. We are trying to warn you, because you need to have some set of mindset that with which you come in. And that is what will take you into better. Like you need to get better at your career. You cannot just come in and just get stagnated. And that's what we say, like always be open to learning, do games, do game jams, understand what is your skill gap, fix it. There's a lot of online articles, YouTube channels, videos, courses, everything that's available for free of cost. Do that and figure out whether you really like it, right? Because no gaming studios care about whether you had a game design graduation or not. Of course, there are some advantages that come with it where, most of your theory is validated. Not saying it doesn't happen. I personally did not come from game design background. And then actually, I would say easily 50% of our game designers right now in Zigga, easily 50% are not from game design backgrounds. And they're all like really good game designers. I would say we are very well balanced that way. And most companies are open to taking that. So don't limit yourselves by saying, I didn't do the course, that's why I couldn't get it. No, that's not true. You can still apply, you can still try, but make sure you're skilled yourself enough. And the only way to do that is by making games.
So true, so true. In fact, yeah, even when I'm hiring, I say that you need not be a MFA or a BFA. You just have to write a good case study which has solved a problem. And if you have really put it out and measured it, I think that's enough for you to sort of get screened at least.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, the portfolio speaks, right? Like there are people who have great academia and great percentages, but their portfolio is nothing. then what will I do with it? And then there are people who have amazing portfolios. I would rather talk to that person.
Yeah. All right, I think we'll conclude this episode on this note. Obviously, there are many, many more questions which I'll nag you for offline. But once again, like very, very thanks for being on the show. It was great learning experience, and thank you for doing this.
Thank you, Kedar. It was really, really fun to be here. Thanks for this conversation.
And that's it from today's Gyan session. For show notes and more Gyan, visit audiogyan.com. If you like this podcast, please don't forget to check our other interesting podcast on IVM Network. You can listen to us on IVM Podcast app, ivmpodcast.com, or any of your favorite podcasting apps. To stay tuned, follow us on Twitter and Instagram at IVM Podcast. And if you wish to connect with me, I am at AudioGyan Moments on Instagram. Until then, take care.
Hello! It's been a great week on the IVM Podcast Network. On This Round is on Me, Gauri is joined by Shweta Nanda. They talk about the financial independence and how it is to be a woman entrepreneur. On Anish Thing, Anish welcomes ultra-marathon runner Shivani Gharat. Shivani shares her journey of how she ran her first marathon, the mindset of a runner, and what it actually takes to run a full marathon. On Cock and Bull, Cyrus, Naveen, Akash and Shreyas talk about the Korean band BTS serving in the military and its repercussions. On Think Fast, Varun and Suchita discuss Wing Greens and their latest acquisitions and about the Indian sexual wellness market. And on Shunyavan, Sheila Dattya is joined by Dinika Bhatia, CEO and founder of Nuttigritties. They talk about coming from a business family and Dinika's journey in creating healthy and guilt-free snacking. Once again, don't forget to visit our merch store on ivmpodcast.com. We have some exciting new merch out there for you. Also, do follow us on social media. We are IVM Podcasts on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn. And do remember to spread the word about these shows and any other shows you might be listening to. Appreciate them, rate them, and review them wherever you are listening to them. You can also check out all our other shows on youtube.com/IVM Podcasts. And finally, we would like to thank our sponsors this week. Volvo XC40 Recharge, Bumble, Heads Up for Tails, Kotak Privy League Program, and HDFC Mutual Fund. Thanks guys, without you this would not be possible.
Do you often find yourself surrounded by conversations about Web3, blockchain, NFTs, DAOs? What are these terms and how do they affect our future on the internet? So many questions, but don't worry, we've got answers to all your questions. Hi, I'm Eklavya Bhattacharya, and on our show Future Proofing, we try to decode the impact of these future technologies on various industries with experts and tech enthusiasts. Tune into new episodes coming out every Thursday on the IVM Podcast app and the website, or wherever you get your podcasts from.